A King Dethroned subscribe now so you don't miss the most shocking stories. Imagine your life is a perfect postcard of success. A paradise on the coast, the sun glinting over the Mediterranean, a dazzling woman by your side. Then, in the middle of a crowd, you see a ghost from your past. But this ghost isn't just a memory. She is horribly pregnant, and the baby is yours. What do you do in that moment? Do you keep walking, or do you confront the perfect lie? The sun rose over Valencia like a newly minted gold coin, ostentatious and blinding. Alexander felt its warmth on his shoulders, a pleasant weight that mirrored the heat of Victoria's hand in his. Her laughter, a sound designed for brunch menus and yacht decks, tinkled beside him. This was his life now, a curated postcard of success. The crisp white linen of his immaculate shirt, the soft sand yielding under his Italian loafers, the woman beside him whose beauty was both a comfort and a statement. It was perfect. It was a lie. And then he saw her. The world slowed to the thick pace of a nightmare. Amidst the scattered families and laughing teenagers, a solitary figure walked near the water's edge. Her pregnancy was unmistakable, a proud, defiant curve against the infinite blue of the sea. She wore a simple dress, faded to the color of a pale sky, and her dark hair was a mess, tousled by the salty wind. It was the way she moved that struck him first, the slight limp she'd had since a childhood fall, the stubborn set of her shoulders. That familiarity bypassed his brain and hit him directly in the stomach. Clara. He hadn't seen her in 8 months, since the lawyers had finished cleaning up their shared life, erasing the vows, and leaving only the sterile language of divorce settlements. He had told himself it was for the best, a clean break. He had sent the checks, insulated himself with work and the seamless company of Victoria, and had almost convinced himself that Clara had simply ceased to exist. But there she was, a ghost under the Valencia sun, impossibly real and devastatingly pregnant. His child. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the breath from him. He remembered the last conversation, a frantic, tear-filled call he had taken on his way to a board meeting. "I'm pregnant, Alex. Please, we have to talk." He had dismissed her, a last desperate plea. He told her to have her lawyer contact his. The memory was acidic in his throat. "Alexander, darling, you look like you've seen a ghost," Victoria whispered, her fingers tightening on his hand. Her voice, usually a calming balm, was now a grating intrusion. He couldn't answer. His gaze was fixed on Clara. She had stopped walking, one hand on her lower back, the other cradling her belly. Her face, even at this distance, was etched with a profound weariness that felt like a personal accusation. The ocean breeze plastered the thin fabric of her dress to her body, outlining the swell of her stomach, her new and sacred shape, a shape he had helped create and then abandoned. The feeling of public shame, a sensation he hadn't experienced since he was a child who had wet the bed, washed over him. He was Alexander, a titan of private equity, a man whose image was as carefully managed as his portfolio, and 50 yards away was the living, breathing, pregnant proof of his deepest failure. People were looking. He could feel their eyes, the whispers that would soon ignite the social circuits of the Costa del Azahar. Clara took another step, and then faltered. Her body swayed, a fragile reed in the wind. Her hand went from her belly to her head, as if trying to hold herself together. Her knees buckled. "Oh my God," Victoria whispered, a note of theatrical horror in her voice. "Is that woman all right?" Time seemed to fracture. Part of him, the cold, calculating part that had built his empire, screamed at him to turn around, to walk away, to pretend he saw nothing. It was a PR disaster, a personal catastrophe. Victoria was already pulling on his arm, her self-preservation instinct engaged. "Alexander, let's go. We shouldn't get involved." But his feet were glued to the sand. He saw Clara's face, pale as sea foam. Her eyes rolled back. She collapsed. Not in a graceful faint, but in a sudden, sickening collapse. Her body hit the wet sand with a soft thud that resonated like a gunshot in the sudden silence of his mind. A collective gasp rippled across the beach. People began to run toward her. A woman screamed for someone to call an ambulance. The perfect curated postcard of his life had just gone up in flames. For one frozen moment, he was just a man watching the mother of his unborn child fall unconscious on the sand. The title, the wealth, the mistress, it all dissolved in the salty air, leaving only the raw, searing agony of his betrayal. The lie he had built was crumbling, as surely as she had, and in its rubble he could only stare, paralyzed by the enormity of what he had done. The sterile, antiseptic smell of the Santa Catalina hospital was a slap, a harsh reality after the open, salty air of the beach. Alexander strode through the automatic doors, his mind a whirlwind of panic and guilt. He had left a furious Victoria in the car, her protests about image and scandal fading into the roar of his own heartbeat. He had followed the ambulance, driving his Aston Martin with a reckless abandon that mirrored the chaos within him. He arrived at the emergency reception desk, his voice clipped and authoritative. "I'm here for Clara Sanchez. She was just brought in from the beach." The receptionist, a sturdy, tired-eyed woman named Marga, looked up from her computer, unimpressed by his tailored suit or the urgency in his tone. "Are you family?" The question hung in the air, a simple bureaucratic inquiry that cut him to the core. He hesitated. "I'm her ex-husband." The words tasted like ash. Marga's fingers clacked on the keyboard. "Her emergency contact is a Donato Espinosa. He's on his way." "I'm sorry, sir, but due to privacy regulations, I can only give out information to immediate family or the designated contact." "I'm the father of her child," he snapped, feeling the words were as much a desperate declaration as a damning confession. The woman's expression didn't soften. If anything, a flash of disapproval crossed her face. "That doesn't change the paperwork, sir. You'll have to wait in the designated waiting room." She gestured vaguely to a collection of uncomfortable plastic chairs, where people sat in various states of anxious, powerless dread. Alexander, who could get the mayor on the phone with a single text, was being stonewalled by a hospital receptionist. The irony was suffocating. He had willingly signed the papers that had severed their legal ties, effectively erasing his right to be there, to know if she was okay, if their baby was okay. It was a self-inflicted wound, and it was bleeding him dry. He retreated to the waiting room, the harsh fluorescent lights exposing every flaw in his composure. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Victoria's name. A dozen messages had already come through. "This is a nightmare, Alex. My phone is blowing up. Did you have to run after her like that? Think of the photos. My agent just called. The press is asking for a comment. We have to get ahead of this. Call Andrew. Now." He ignored them all. His mind flashed back to another call, months ago. He was in a company car, stuck in city traffic, on his way to close a major deal. Clara's name had flashed on the screen. He had let it go to voicemail, annoyed by the interruption. He had listened to it later, her voice small and shaky. "Alex, I didn't want to do this over the phone. I'm pregnant. I know everything is a mess, but it's yours. Please, can we just talk? Not with lawyers, just us." He had deleted the message. He had rationalized it as a pathetic last-ditch effort to get back into his life, to get a bigger settlement. He had instructed his lawyer, Andrew, to make it clear that all communication must go through legal channels. He had built a wall of money and lawyers around himself, and now he was on the wrong side of it, desperate to get in. A doctor in blue scrubs emerged from a set of double doors, his face grim. Alexander leaped to his feet, but the doctor walked past him to an elderly couple huddled in the corner. Alexander sank back into his chair, the brief rush of adrenaline leaving him feeling hollow. He was a ghost here, a specter from a past life with no rights in the present. He had paid a fortune to become a stranger to Clara, and the universe, it seemed, had cashed the check. What would you have done in Alexander's shoes? Would you have stayed to face the consequences, or run away to protect your reputation? Let me know in the comments below. Every tick of the clock on the wall was a fresh torment. Was she awake? Was the baby alive? The questions were an incessant pounding against the inside of his skull. He thought of her collapse, the way her body had just given out. Had she been alone all this time, struggling, while he was choosing wines with Victoria and pretending his past didn't exist? The weight of his emotional abandonment settled on him, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just the divorce, the affair. It was the deliberate, calculated way he had silenced her. He had denied her her humanity. He had treated her pleas as a business nuisance to be managed. Finally, an older man with a kind, weathered face and a shock of white hair strode into the waiting room. He exuded a quiet strength, his expression a mixture of fear and fierce protectiveness. He went straight to the desk. "I'm David Espinoza. I'm here for Clara Sanchez." Marga's demeanor changed instantly. "Of course, Mr. Espinoza. Right this way. Dr. Prieto is waiting to speak with you." As David walked past, his eyes met Alexander's. There was no flash of surprise, just a deep, abysmal contempt that was more hurtful than any verbal assault. In that single look, Alexander saw himself as David must see him. A destructive force, a man who broke beautiful things and walked away from the rubble. David didn't say a word. He simply held Alexander's gaze a second longer before disappearing through the double doors, leaving Alexander alone in the waiting room, a dethroned king in a kingdom of plastic chairs and sterile silence. An hour passed, every minute an eternity. Alexander paced the small waiting room, ignoring the insistent buzzing of his phone. He had finally sent Andrew a single, clipped message. "Handle the press, no comment." It was a reflex, a play from his corporate playbook, but it felt utterly empty. The double doors opened again. David Espinoza emerged, his face still grim, but the sharp edge of panic had softened into something closer to tired resolve. Alexander immediately closed the distance between them. "How is she?" Alexander's voice was hoarse. David stopped, looking at him with the same cold disdain as before. "She's stable. The baby is too for now. Severe dehydration, exhaustion, and a spike in her blood pressure. The doctor called it a pre-eclamptic warning. They'll keep her for observation." The relief, so potent it made him dizzy, flooded through Alexander. "Thank God. Can I see her?" David's laugh was a short, bitter bark. "You really think you have the right to ask that?" "She's carrying my child, David. I have every right." "A right you forfeited when you sent her legal notices instead of answering her calls." David shot back, his voice low but vibrating with anger. "A right you signed away in a document that paid you for the privilege of your own absence. You don't get to waltz in now, smelling of expensive cologne and guilt, and pretend you're anything more than the cause of this." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and they all hit their mark. "I didn't know," Alexander said, the excuse sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "I thought she was—" You thought she was lying, trying to manipulate you? David finished, his eyes boring into Alexander's. Because that's what you do, isn't it, Alexander? You evaluate people as threats or as assets. Clara was an asset until she wasn't, so you liquidated her. Did you ever, for 1 second, stop to consider that she was just a person? A terrified, pregnant woman you once promised to love and protect. The truth of the accusation left him speechless. He had done that. He had reduced the woman he once loved, the woman who knew his fears and his dreams, to a line item on a ledger he was trying to close. I want to see her, Alexander repeated, his voice quieter now, stripped of its usual authority. It was a plea. David studied him for a long moment, a silent battle playing out behind his eyes. She's sleeping, he finally said. The doctor gave her a mild sedative. I'll ask her when she wakes up. But I'm telling you now, Alexander, if she says no, you'll turn around and walk out of this hospital. You will not cause another scene. You've done enough damage for 1 lifetime. He had no choice but to agree. He retreated to his chair, feeling like a supplicant. Another hour passed. Finally, David reappeared in the door and gave a clipped, almost imperceptible nod. Alexander's heart hammered against his ribs as he followed David down the hall. The air became quieter, filled with the soft beeps and hums of medical machinery. They stopped in front of a room, number 314. David paused, his hand on the door. She's awake. She agreed to see you for 5 minutes. Do not upset her. Upset. Alexander nodded, his throat tight. He opened the door and walked in. Clara was propped up on pillows, an IV taped to the back of her hand. The color had returned to her cheeks, but her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. She looked fragile, yet her gaze, when it settled on him, was as hard as steel. The silence in the room was thick with unspoken history, with betrayal and pain. Clara, he whispered her name. What do you want, Alexander? Her voice was raw but steady. There was no pleading, no tears, just a chilling emptiness. He walked to the bed, his hands feeling useless at his sides. I'm so sorry. I saw you on the beach. I had no idea. You had no idea I was still pregnant? She asked, a flicker of bitter humor in her eyes. Or you had no idea I was poor enough to be walking on a public beach instead of lounging at a private club? That's not fair. Fair? A weak, incredulous laugh escaped her. You want to talk about fair? It was fair when I called you, begging you to just talk to me, and got a letter from your lawyer threatening me with a harassment suit. It was fair when I found out you were vacationing on the Amalfi Coast with her from a gossip magazine, while I was throwing up every morning, terrified I was going to lose this baby. He flinched. I can help. Anything you need. Money, doctors, a place to live, whatever it is. Just name what you want. It was his default setting, his solution to every problem. Write a check. Her expression hardened into something close to disgust. You still don't get it, do you? You think you can abandon a person and then just buy your way back into their life when it's convenient? This isn't a hostile takeover, Alexander. This is a baby. My baby. A human life. And it's not for sale. The rejection was absolute. A door slammed shut in his face. She wasn't asking for his money. She was demanding his humanity. The very part of himself he had systematically dismantled in pursuit of his success. What do you want from me, then? He asked, his voice breaking. Right now, she said, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. I want you to leave. Your 5 minutes are up. He stood there, frozen, the chasm between them wider than ever. He had come to fix things, to manage the situation. But he was realizing, with a clarity that was both terrifying and liberating, that some things couldn't be bought fixed, or managed. Some debts were paid not in dollars, but in something far more costly. And he hadn't even begun to understand the currency. The drive back to his sterile, glass-walled beach house was a blur. Alexander walked in to find Victoria on the phone, her voice a carefully modulated mix of indignation and victimhood. She was pacing the marble floor of the living room, a flute of champagne in her hand. "Unbelievable, I know. He just left me there. Of course, my concern is for the woman, but the sheer humiliation." She saw him, and her expression hardened. "I have to call you back." She ended the call and confronted him. "Well, is your little charity case all sorted?" The casual cruelty of her words hit him like a physical blow. "Her name is Clara," he said, his voice dangerously low. "And she collapsed. She's in the hospital. She could have lost the baby." "Oh, please," Victoria scoffed, taking a delicate sip of champagne. "How terribly dramatic and convenient, just when you happen to walk by. Don't you see what this is, Alexander? It's a setup. She's a gold digger, and she just hit the jackpot. The press is going to have a field day with the story of the poor pregnant ex-wife collapsing at the feet of the heartless millionaire and his new girlfriend. It's not a story, Victoria. It's my life. It's our life," she snapped, her composure finally cracking. "The life I've worked very hard to build with you. The brand, the image. Do you have any idea what this does to us? To me? I'm not just your girlfriend. I'm a brand ambassador. My reputation is tied to yours. This mess you've made, it threatens everything." He looked at her then, really looked at her. He saw the perfectly coiffed hair, the designer dress, the flash of panic and calculation in her eyes. He had chosen her because she was easy. She was uncomplicated, a beautiful accessory who asked for nothing more than his money could provide. She was the antithesis of Clara, who had challenged him, who had demanded his heart, his attention, his soul. He had fled that complexity into this empty gilded cage. "This isn't about a brand," he said, the realization dawning on him with sickening clarity. "This is about a child. My child." Victoria's face twisted into a mask of fury and fear. "So that's it? You run back to her? After everything I've done for you, supported you through that ugly divorce, helped you rebuild your image?" "You helped me build a lie," he replied, the words tasting bitter. "And it just collapsed on a beach." She stepped toward him, her eyes burning. "You need to handle this, Alexander. You need to silence her, pay her off, get her to sign an NDA so strict she can't even whisper your name. If you don't, she'll poison everything. She's a threat to us, to me, and you need to decide who you're going to protect." The threat was Clara. It wasn't just about PR. It was about her position, her security. Clara and the baby were an existential threat to the world Victoria had so carefully constructed. "You were never more to me than a distraction," he said, the words as cruel as they were true. "And the distraction is over." He hung up the phone, his hand shaking. The fury receded, replaced by a cold, sick dread. He thought of Clara, alone in her small apartment, likely seeing this article at that very moment. This public humiliation, this vicious attack, was happening because of him. He had brought Victoria into his life, and in doing so, he had brought this plague down upon Clara. He had ended things with Victoria, but the damage was already done. He had finally burned the bridge to his past, but in doing so, he had set fire to the very ground where he was trying to build a new foundation. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over Clara's name, knowing with absolute certainty that this time an air conditioner wouldn't be enough to fix what he had allowed to break. How do you rebuild trust? After such a devastating betrayal and public humiliation. Is it even possible? Let me know what you think in the comments. The call to Clara was the hardest he had ever made. He expected screaming, tears, accusations. He got something far worse. A quiet, profound exhaustion. "I saw it, Alexander," she said, before he could even apologize. Her voice was flat, empty. "A friend from work sent me the link. Congratulations. You've succeeded in painting me as a manipulative, cheating whore to the entire world. Clara, I am so sorry. It was Victoria. I've ended it with her. It's over. I swear I had nothing to do with that. It doesn't matter if you did, or if you just stood by and let it happen," she replied, her voice breaking with a pain that cut him to the core. "The outcome is the same. My name is mud. My picture is everywhere. People I know are looking at me differently. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" He didn't. He had always been the one in control of the narrative, the one who paid publicists to shape his image. He had never been on the receiving end of a public dissection. "I'll fix this," he vowed, reverting to old instincts. "I'll have Andrew issue a statement. We'll sue the blog for defamation. I'll spend whatever it takes to clear your name." "No," she said, her voice firm. "No more statements. No more lawyers. No more public battles. That's your world, Alexander, not mine. Every time you try to fix things, you just make a bigger mess. Just stay away from me. Please, I can't take any more of this. I need to protect myself. I need to protect this baby." She hung up. The finality in her voice was absolute. He had been completely shut out. For the first week, he honored her request. It was agony. He felt like a phantom limb, an amputated part of a family he was desperate to join. The silence was a roar in his ears. He instructed Andrew to issue a single, laconic statement. "The story is a malicious fabrication. Mr. Vera has the utmost respect for his ex-wife, Ms. Sanchez, and asks that the media respect her privacy at this time." And he also had his legal team send a cease and desist letter so threatening that the blog retracted the story within hours. But the damage was done. The lie was out there, living in social media feeds and in the minds of strangers. He realized she was right. His methods, the money, the power, the legal threats, were a foreign language in the country of her pain. They were the tools of the man who had hurt her, not the tools of the man who might possibly heal her. He needed a new currency, so he started showing up. Not with grand gestures, but with quiet consistency. He learned her schedule through David. He knew her weekly obstetrician appointment was on Tuesday mornings. The first Tuesday. He parked his car across the street from her building at 8 a.m. At 8:30, he watched her leave, her movements slow and careful, and begin the long 4-block walk to the bus stop. He didn't approach her. He just watched, his heart aching with every step she took. The next Tuesday, he did the same. But this time, as she locked her door, he sent her a text message. "My car is across the street. I can drive you to your appointment. I won't speak if you don't want me to. I'll just drive. If you don't want me to, I'll understand." He watched her read the message, her body tensing. She looked across the street and saw his car. For an entire minute, she stood there, wrestling with herself. Then, with a deep sigh, she walked not to the bus stop, but to him. She got in the car and didn't say a word. Neither did he. He drove her to the doctor's office. The silence was thick, but not entirely hostile. It was a truce. When they arrived, she started to get out. "I'll wait here," he said, "to drive you home." She paused, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and went inside. It became their weekly ritual. He drove her. They sat in silence. He waited. He drove her home. It was a strange, silent penance. He was no longer her ex-husband or her lover. He was her chauffeur, a background character in the story of her pregnancy. But he was there. Slowly, other small acts followed. He learned from a passing comment David had made that she had a craving for a specific brand of pickles. He drove to a store, bought 3 jars, and left them in a bag outside her apartment door with a simple note. Just in case. He started reading. Not financial reports, but parenting books. He read about trimesters and fetal development. He filled the empty spaces in his life not with deals and conquests, but with knowledge about the child he was determined to know. One afternoon, as he drove her home after an appointment, she finally spoke. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery. "Because you told me the baby deserves a father," he replied honestly. "And you were right. I'm trying to learn how to be one. Buying pickles and reading books doesn't make you a father, Alexander." "I know," he said. "Being present does. Consistency, reliability, showing up. That's what I failed at. That's what I'm trying to learn now." She was silent for the rest of the ride, but when he pulled up to her building, she didn't get out right away. "The baby's room needs to be painted," she said, still not looking at him. "And I can't do it myself. The fumes." It was the first time she had asked him for anything. Not money, not a grand gesture, just his time, his effort, his presence. "What color?" he asked, his heart swelling with a fragile, painful hope. "A soft yellow," she said, "like the sun." He promised to come with paint on Saturday morning. She finally turned and looked at him. Her eyes were still guarded, her trust a distant shore he might never reach. But for the first time, he saw something other than pain in them. It was a flicker of recognition. A recognition that his new currency, the simple, unglamorous currency of showing up, was finally beginning to register. Saturday arrived, and Alexander showed up not in a sports car, but in a rental van, loaded with cans of low VOC paint, rollers, brushes, and drop cloths. He spent the entire day in Clara's small, stuffy spare room, taping the edges, and methodically painting the walls a pale yellow. Clara stayed in the living room, ostensibly on bed rest, but he could feel her presence, her quiet observation of his work. They didn't talk much. He would ask a question. "Do you want me to paint the trim white?" And she would give a simple answer. But the shared space, the domesticity of the task, began to erode the formal distance between them. He saw her world up close, the worn armchair, the second-hand books covering the shelves, the single-framed photo of her late mother on the mantel. This was the life she had built from the ashes of the one he had burned. It was small and humble, but it was hers, and it was real. The quiet, steady rhythm of their lives continued for weeks. The Tuesday drives, the occasional errand. He assembled a crib for her, his brow furrowed in concentration over the inscrutable instructions. He installed baby gates, even though she was months away from needing them. Each task was a small, steady brick in a foundation he was desperately trying to lay. He was becoming a fixture, a reliable presence that no longer made her flinch. Trust wasn't spoken, but it was there, a fragile shoot in the scorched earth of their past. Then came the call. It was just after 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in late autumn. He was asleep in his city apartment when his phone rang on the bedside table. He saw her name and woke instantly. His blood turned to ice. "Alexander." Her voice was tight with pain, breathless. "Clara, what's wrong? Is it the baby?" I don't know," she gasped. "I have cramps, really bad, and I think my water just broke. It's too early, Alex. I'm only 34 weeks. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded him. "I'm on my way. Call 911. "No, there's no time. I can't. David is away. I tried to call a taxi. They said it would be 40 minutes. Alexander, please, I'm scared." The raw fear in her voice erased any remaining distance between them. She had called him. In her moment of terror, she had reached for him. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice a rock of calm he didn't feel. "Hold on, Clara. I'm coming." He moved faster than he ever had in his life. He got dressed, grabbed his keys. He broke every speed limit on the deserted late-night roads, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. His mind was a frantic prayer. Please let her be okay. Please let the baby be okay. He found her on the floor of her living room, her face pale and beaded with sweat. He gently helped her to her feet, wrapped her in a blanket, and carried her down the 4 flights of stairs to his car. The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and her sharp, pained gasps from the passenger seat. The ER staff swarmed them the moment he pulled up. They took her away on a gurney, her hand reaching for his, for a fleeting second before she disappeared through the double doors. And then he was alone again, back in the waiting room, where this nightmare had begun months ago. But this time was different. He wasn't a ghost. When the nurse came to get his information, he knew the answers. He knew her doctor's name, her due date, her allergies. He was now on her intake form, right under David, as her emergency contact. A small bureaucratic change that felt like a seismic shift. Hours passed. He called David, who was distraught and promised to take the first flight back. He paced. He drank bitter coffee from a vending machine. He prayed to a god he wasn't sure he believed in. Finally, just as the first gray light of dawn was breaking, Dr. Prieto, the same doctor from before, appeared. Her face was tired, but calm. "Mr. Vera." He searched her face, bracing himself for the worst. Is the baby?" Clara had a placental abruption, likely related to her preeclampsia, the doctor explained. "It was critical. We had to perform an emergency C-section, but she's stable now. She's in recovery." He slumped against the wall in relief. "And the baby?" Dr. Prieto smiled. "You have a daughter. She's small. She's a little under 5 pounds, and she's in the NICU as a precaution. But she's breathing on her own. She's a fighter." A daughter. The words resonated deep in his soul. He had a daughter. "Can I see them?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "You can see your daughter now," she said. "Clara will be out of recovery in about an hour." He followed a nurse through a maze of corridors to the neonatal intensive care unit. After scrubbing his hands raw, he was led to a small, clear incubator. And there she was, so tiny, so impossibly perfect, with a little shock of dark hair just like her mother's. She was hooked up to monitors that emitted soft beeps, but her tiny chest rose and fell with a steady, determined rhythm. He reached a hand through the portal and gently placed a finger on her small hand, which latched on. Her impossibly tiny fingers curled around his. In that moment, the entire world fell away. The money, the power, the mistakes, the betrayals. None of it mattered. All that existed was the overwhelming, terrifying, unconditional love for this one small, fragile human being. This was his daughter, his responsibility, his redemption. He too didn't know how long he stood there, just watching her breathe. When he finally went to Clara's room, he found her awake, pale but lucid. He walked to the bed, his heart too full for words. She looked at him, her eyes filled with the same awe and exhaustion he felt. "Did you see her?" Clara said, a tear rolling down her cheek. "She's perfect," he managed to say. "She's beautiful, just like her mother." He sat in the chair beside her bed and, for the first time, took her hand. She didn't pull away. They sat in an exhausted, shared silence. They were no longer exes. They were no longer adversaries. They were simply two parents, forever linked by a fierce, miraculous love for the little girl fighting for her life one floor below. The longest night of their lives was over, and in its wake, a new, uncertain day was dawning. 2 weeks later, the baby, whom Clara had named Hope, was discharged from the NICU. The apartment he had once seen as a symbol of her struggle was now a baby's room, bathed in the soft yellow light of the walls he had painted. It was cluttered with diapers, bottles, and the beautiful chaos of a new life. Their new reality was a strange dance of co-parenting. It wasn't a rekindled romance. There were no grand declarations of love or forgiveness. Instead, their interactions were based on the mundane, essential logistics of keeping a tiny human being alive. Their conversations were about feeding schedules, doctor's appointments, and whose turn it was to soothe the baby at 3 a.m. Yet within this routine, something new was taking root. He saw the fierce, tireless love in the way Clara held Hope, the soft lullabies she sang when she thought no one was listening. And she saw him. She saw him expertly swaddle their daughter, a skill he had learned from a YouTube video at 4 a.m. She saw him pace endlessly in the small living room, rocking a fussy Hope on his shoulder until she finally fell asleep. She saw him not as the billionaire who had abandoned her, but as Hope's father. A man who showed up. A man who stayed. That evening, an autumn chill rattled the window panes. Hope was sleeping in her bassinet next to the sofa, making soft, cooing sounds. Alexander had just finished washing the dishes from dinner, Chinese takeout eaten from their cartons, while Clara watched him, a thoughtful, unreadable expression on her face. He dried his hands and sat in the worn armchair across from her. The silence was comfortable now, a shared space rather than an empty one. "David called today," she said, her voice soft. "He's happy you've been here." "I'm glad to be here," he said, simply. It was the truest thing he had ever said. The boardrooms and billion-dollar deals of his old life felt like a dream from another existence. This small apartment, with the scent of baby powder and the quiet breathing of his daughter, felt like the only real place in the world. "This is hard, Alexander," she admitted, finally looking at him. "Seeing you here, remembering everything. Sometimes I'm still so angry with you I can barely breathe." "I know," he said, his gaze unwavering. "You have every right to be. I don't expect you to forgive me, Clara. Maybe never. All I can do is try to be the father that Hope deserves." She looked at their daughter, her expression softening. "She deserves everything." She looked back at him. "What happens now? What is this?" It was the question that hung between them every day. They weren't a couple. They weren't just co-parents. They were something in between. Two people bound by a painful past and a precious, hopeful future. "I don't know," he confessed. "We're writing a new book, I guess, and we're just on the first page." He hesitated, then took a leap. "It's getting late. Can I stay on the sofa in case you need help with the night feeding?" Clara looked at him, her eyes searching his. She saw no agenda, no manipulation, just a tired man, offering his presence. She thought of the long, lonely nights ahead, the overwhelming weight of being a new mother. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Okay, Alexander, you can stay." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a promise of a future together. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acceptance. It was a single, shaky step onto the new path they were forging together. A path not back to what they had lost, but towards something they had yet to define. He had once tried to erase her, but now, in this small, quiet room, he had finally found his place in her story. Not as the villain, not even as the hero, but simply as a man, present on the page, ready to see what the next chapter would bring. The journey of healing is never a straight line. Can trust, once shattered, ever truly be whole again? What does redemption really look like, day by day, in the quiet moments between the dramatic scenes? The story of Alexander and Clara is far from over. If you believe in second chances and the power of showing up, let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that explore the complicated and beautiful landscape of the human heart.